So how do these hormones actually work? So the endocrine glands secrete hormones into the extracellular fluid. So this could be blood, it could be outside the cell itself, and it's going to do it through diffusion or this thing called exo. Remember, exo means outside, and cytosis means a vesicle. So it's going to make a vesicle around these hormones or chemicals and push them outside. So these hormones enter the bloodstream and they're carried around the whole body until they get to those target cells. When they get to those target cells, the hormone is going to diffuse into the cell and activate something. So let's go ahead and pretend this is going to be, let's say, the pituitary gland. It's making hormones, dumping it into the bloodstream. These hormones are going to travel through the bloodstream, and then let's say these are the adrenal cells. These are the hormones that they're intended to go to. So these hormones are meant to go to the adrenal glands, find the adrenal system, and these hormones have a specific shape that only match this receptor. So any other hormone could come here and touch it, but because their shape don't match, it doesn't activate it. So this hormone diffuses out, touches this receptor, and does some sort of reaction in these cells. And then these cells will typically make a chemical, put it back in the bloodstream, and eventually it'll go back to the pituitary gland to say, yes, I'm doing that. Whatever you told me, I'm doing it. So the effects of hormones is it's going to elicit a response in the target tissue. So it could be the things like start for reproduction. It could be for growth and development. With growth and development, you don't activate one muscle at a time. You sort of have this coordinated effect with your muscles and your ligaments and your bones, and they all sort of grow at the same time. Maintenance of water and nutrients in your body. This is going to be parts of your metabolism that are going to be controlled here, and it's really going to be talking to your adrenal glands and your kidneys to sort of figure out what you have and what you have too much of, and then it'll just push it out of your body, which we'll talk about in Unit 3. Regulates metabolism. We'll talk about metabolism a little bit in Unit 4. And triggers immune response. So we can actually go ahead and protect the body using hormones as well. We'll talk about all those coming up this semester. And that's only a small version. There's different types of hormones. There's an amino acid based, and most hormones are this type. So the amino acid ones are going to be short peptide chains. You could build them from foods that you eat, and they travel through and go through the bloodstream pretty easily. These are going to be called hydrophilic because they like water. The steroids is another class of hormones. These are synthesized from cholesterols and fats. They're kind of go to the gonadal region, the other parts of the body, the adrenal cortex, testosterone, estrogen. These are going to be those subclass. These are the minority of the hormones. These ones, because cholesterol is a type of fat, they're not going to like water or blood, so they're going to have to maneuver and get to cells a different way. They'll even get in the cells a little differently. So we're going to call anything amino acid based hydrophilic because they like water, and we're going to call anything steroid based hydrophobic because they hate water. The effects of hormones, like we said, we already talked about it, binds to receptors on target cells, it opens ions, it goes ahead and makes a cell permissible, it's going to make other enzymes work, it's going to elicit some sort of response. It might even do mitosis if it's doing reproduction or just helping fix cells. A hormone's going to bind to a receptor because it travels through the bloodstream. And the water-soluble ones, which is another name for water-soluble, is going to be hydrophilic. Those are going to be the amino acid protein base. That's the majority of them. They're going to bind to a receptor in the plasma membrane and activate a secondary messenger, a G protein, which we'll talk about soon. The lipid-soluble hormone, because it's sort of made out of fat, it'll travel right through the lipid bilayer and goes right into the nucleus and activates some genes. Remember, the lipid bilayer one, the lipid ones or the steroid ones, they're going to be called hydrophobic. We'll get to those in a few minutes, how they actually work. So don't worry about going back and listening to that slide. So receptors, if this is, pretend, a hormone, and this is the cell that needs that hormone, you could see that that's kind of like a key, and it only unlocks a certain cell. Well, that's how hormones are, where this is the hormone, this is the cell, only this shape can go ahead and bind here and activate it. So these hormones are very specific. If you ever hear of somebody having a hormone imbalance, what it could mean is that one of these shapes are missing. And when these shapes are missing, then that cell is waiting for that hormone, but the hormone doesn't fit for some reason. Usually it's a genetic reason, and it causes the cell not to be activated. So a type of diabetes that you're born with the defect is that they don't make that hormone correctly. And when they don't make the hormone shape correctly, they're making the hormone, they're hoping that this activation occurs, but because it's the wrong shape, it doesn't activate the cell. Kind of like if you went to Lowe's, ordered a key for your house, brought it home, and it was slightly misshapen, of course it's not going to open your door or do whatever it needs. And that's how it's going to sort of work. So these sample right over here is going to be how G proteins work. This is going to be how cells that are made up of proteins and amino acids are going to work. So these are going to be our hydrophilic ones, the good ones. So here's the inside of the cell, here's the outside of the cell. Here's the hormone. The hormone will go ahead and touch a receptor, and by doing this, an electrical current will occur. And the electrical current will go ahead and turn this thing called a GDP into the activated form GTP. You might have heard of something that's similar to this called ATP and ADP. Well, this is a very similar system. It just uses guanine instead of adenine. So same thing, T is going to be 3 phosphates, D is going to be 2 phosphates. The D one is the deactivated form, the T is the activated form. So this hormone touches this protein, which goes ahead and adds a phosphate to turn it into the activated form GTP. That turns this G protein to become active. And all it does is 2 things, really. Number one, can you see how the shape changed? Because this is the same hormone, this is the same, protein. It went from looking like this to looking like this. The other thing you could see is that it's traveling. And it's traveling to this adenosine synthase, or CCAMP area. That's another thing, what they call it. And by activating to this, what's going to happen is this will now do a reaction. And it's going to go ahead and turn an ATP and this thing called CAMP, or cyclic AMP. And it's going to turn an inactivated protein into an activated protein. This activated protein is now going to go into the nucleus to trigger a certain response. It'll actually touch the DNA and say, hey, start making this. And this process is called a secondary messenger. Can you see how, like, here's our first messenger, and now here's our secondary messenger? And this is actually going to go to the DNA and activate, say, hey, start making this, or hey, stop making this. We'll go over this again in class. So stimulation of hormones get released, and there's 3 types of hormones. There's a humoral stimuli, neural stimuli, and hormonal. So humoral, neural, and hormonal. Humoral is going to be the hormone releases causing an altered level of certain ion or nutrient. So the example would be the parathyroid, when it goes ahead and releases calcium into the blood when it's too low. So this is going to be an example of a humoral response. This is the thyroid. Para means behind. You can see these little things right over here. And what they're responsible for is calcium levels in the blood. If it's too high, it's going to put it into your bones. If the calcium level is too low, it's going to take it out of your bones. And now that you've done 201, you know calcium is used for muscle contraction. A neural stimuli, you also know this from 201, which is where you get a neural input from, let's say, the brain or the spine, and it does that action potential, and it causes some sort of release. So it could be epinephrine or norepinephrine in response to stress. And then, of course, hormonal. We've been talking about this one a little bit here and there, but it's basically where your pituitary gland is going to send out a hormone, and these hormones are going to elicit responses either in the body or in that gland itself to do something. And then, let's see. The endocrine glands are basically these glands or hormones that are all over the place. They're ductless because they basically release these hormones outside the cell. Remember, when they release something outside of itself, it's called exocytosis, and it's just pushing it outside the cell through these vesicles. And examples of this would be the thyroid, pituitary gland, the pineal gland, parathyroid, pancreas, ovaries, testes. If you don't know what some of these are, don't worry, because we're going to cover it this semester. In my next video, we'll talk about what the pituitary gland does.